when it comes to government employees getting paid, it's shut down for one day. That wasn't the whole pay cycle, right? So they didn't notice a change in their paycheck. When we get into these ones where it's longer than 2 weeks, like where we are right now, now's where they start feeling it. To your point, they're going to get paid eventually. Where it becomes very frustrating is those who are working in essential services. So, federal police, FBI, bureaucrats that are required to show up for work, military, people of that nature, they're still doing their job every single day, but they're not getting paid.
There is another impact that could potentially happen is if this continues to go on much longer, and this is another reason why I think they'll probably end up getting this thing fixed or coming to some kind of an agreement, but reduction in force, RIFs.
Yeah.
So at some point, you're going to start seeing layoffs. It hasn't happened yet, but we're not only talking about, government employees being basically out of work for a few months, but then getting back pay when they go back. We're talking about them losing their job.
Right.
And that could have a much bigger impact than some folks not getting paid for a couple weeks. Hello, welcome back to another edition of the Retirement Planning Happy Hour. Eric Douglas, Chris Vaughn with Family Wealth Planning Partners. Thank you very much for joining us once again. We appreciate you being here as we have an interesting, more topical topic.
We don't normally do this
today, right? We try to stay away from headlines, at least kind of regular headlines too terribly much, because the day that we shoot the podcast, something if we get too terribly topical, by the time it publishes a week later, it might not be so topical.
Everything's changed, right?
But I think this topic has gone on long enough where it's like, okay, we're starting to get enough questions about it, and this has gone on long enough. We probably need to maybe start talking about the government shutdown a little bit.
Yep, amen.
And what that means for your retirement, what that means for the economy, what that means for the stock market. Doesn't mean anything for any of those three, right? And the answer kind of depends upon whether or not really you work for the government is probably just to not give away the game here too much. But all that to say, we'll talk all things government shutdown, how that affects you, how that affects some other things in relation to the economy. With that being said, what have we got to drink here today?
All right. So for our bourbon today, I kind of was inspired by something I've heard you say many, many times. My sweet spot is in that $40 to $50, maybe $60 a bottle range, right? Now, I'm different, obviously. But when it gets more expensive than that, the flavor is just not good enough to justify the extra expense in your mind. So
the value versus price.
Right, yeah. So I figured, okay, let's go get something that, quite frankly, I have not had this in a while. It's been a long time, like 5-6 years since I've had this, right after it first came out, I believe. But this is a really, really common one. It's easy to find in any decent-sized liquor store. Even most smaller liquor stores are probably going to have a little bit of it. And this is a $47 bottle when I picked it up about an hour ago. Yeah. And this is Four Roses Small Batch Select. Now, they have a couple of different small batches. And basically a small batch means that they are blending multiple barrels, but not a large amount of them like you would do with your normal, big production runs. Small batches are typically going to be 20 to 100 barrels. Every company's a little different, so there's no rule there. But with the two different batches that they do, this is their more premier product. The regular small batch is around $30 a bottle. Very, very inexpensive. Very good, by the way.
Well, it's interesting you say that because my birthday was a few weeks ago, and I hadn't had Four Roses, to your point, in years. I couldn't tell you the last time I had it, and I just got a bottle as a birthday gift of Four Roses earlier this month.
Now, which one did you get?
It wasn't this one. It was a small batch. It wasn't a small batch select, which I've never had this select actually.
So you've obviously had the small batch. Yep. In theory, this is the same thing. It's just it's the premier version of it.
Yeah.
I did just double check, as you could see. It's 104 proof. So this is not weak, but it's not super strong by any definition. The bottled and bond stuff, which to me is kind of the happy place for cocktails and things like that, it's 100. So at 104, this is right in that window. I think probably the best one that we've tasted as far as our combined reactions to it was the Antique 107. Mm-hmm. So from a proof point, we're right in that window there. So I thought this one would be fun to try while we're talking about our favorite topic in the world, tongue in cheek,
Government.
the government.
Who doesn't love the government?
What's the most terrifying phrase in the world? I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Well,
right?
It's even doubly worse because, we just had, tax day, October 15th here recently.
Right, for people who filed extensions, yeah.
So it wasn't that long ago. I just wrote my check to the government. Love talking about the government right now. But as it relates to the topic for today, I mean, we want to focus more specifically on the government shutdown. We'll try not to get too terribly political. I'm afraid some of it might bleed through.
I don't know if you and I can resist,
but
we'll try.
But all that to say, it's not so much our thoughts on whether or not the government shutdown is a good thing or not. It's more or less we want to focus on the ramifications of the government shutdown and if there are any to the greater economy.
Right. Okay.
And so with that being said, a few talking points to kind of set things up. We are in week 4, almost week 5 of the government shutdown. So we are officially
on the day we record, right?
On the day that we record today. So by the time this publishes, we might be out of the government shutdown. Who knows? I don't know. But we are officially in week 4, which now officially makes this one of the top 5 longest government shutdowns ever in the history.
Really? Okay. I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah,
All right.
which is interesting because the amount of press on this shutdown seems to be far more muted than I'm used to hearing. So usually, during government shutdowns, it gets you hear a lot of press, you hear a lot of scare tactics.
It's all over the news, sure.
Oh my goodness, everything's, everything's wrong, everything's horrible, and the government's shutting down. Oh my God, what's going to happen? I'm not really seeing much of that this time. And the reaction has been, to me anyway, at least kind of publicly and societally, far more muted than what I'm traditionally used to seeing when it comes to government shutdowns. I'm not saying that's good, bad, or it's an observation that I'm noticing that I don't think this shutdown doesn't seem to be resonating like I've seen previous ones resonate within the kind of the greater public. I mentioned something to my wife and she didn't even know there was a government shutdown. Had no clue. And actually, the fact that we were filming this, we had to check to see how long it's been going on because we weren't even sure if there was still a shutdown in effect or not.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
So just kind of how off the radar this shutdown has been very interesting to me because normally I'm very much on top of these things, and I'm just not hearing or seeing too terribly much about it.
I've actually now I'm a news junkie. You know that. I get my news from multiple sources. I do some podcasts, things like that. I have seen quite a bit of coverage, but not as much as I would expect. So what I mean by that is, as I'm watching a news article that's going on, they mention the government shutdown, and then they move on. It's not going in depth to it, to your point, like we've seen in the past. They're not driving it home. My wife was aware there was a government shutdown, but she had to ask me, what does that mean? Right? Which she's like most people, what does a government shutdown even mean?
Well, actually, and the cynic in me, and this thought just came to me actually, but the cynic in me, if there was one, might suggest that Trump deciding to demolish the East Wing to put up that new ballroom,
oh my gosh,
was timed pretty well.
Yeah.
Along with this government shutdown. So there's so many people focusing more on that than they are focusing on the government shutdown. So I don't know if
do
that's
we want to go down that rabbit hole?
Probably
not.
I'm gonna guess that's not a game of 5D chess. But it is interesting that has taken I hear a lot more about that than I'm hearing about the government shutdown. And in reality, you would think one is far more important than the other. But
you're absolutely right. I have heard more about that one. So all right.
Anyway, so as it relates to the government shutdown, who does this primarily affect? Government workers,
right?
Obviously, and if your paycheck depends upon the government being open, you're probably not very happy with this shutdown and the length of time that it has gone on.
Right.
I know some friends that are government workers; they're not too terribly happy right now. Yeah. It just kind of is what it is. I think at this point, because with a divided government in Washington being what it is, these are becoming far more common. And so this used to be a very, very kind of rare thing, and we're starting to see it a little bit more recently, where government shutdowns are kind of becoming a tool, so to speak, a negotiating tool.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what it is.
And so it's interesting. One thing I thought of, or one thing I was thinking about during the shutdown was if you're a government employee, I feel like it has to be to the point now where you have to have an emergency fund of at least 6 months saved up at all times. Like that's if you're a government employee, that has to be a core part of your plan. If your paycheck depends upon the government being open, you need to have some cash set aside to cover just expenditures and expenses and things like that.
Well, okay, so basic financial planning says that you should have an emergency fund anyway. Right.
Correct.
And there's no correct number, but yeah, kind of the standard is 6 months worth of expenses. Totally agree. But to your point, in the case of government workers, where this has become more of a political tactic than it is a necessity, and we could argue about. I was thinking earlier when I was looking at your chart, and I went, "Oh, it's not talking about the one we had earlier this year." Oh, wait a minute, we didn't have one earlier this year. They threatened it,
mm-hmm.
and then there were certain types of capitulation, which you could argue is what's causing this one. But if you are a government employee, and we're talking federal government now, we're not
Correct.
talking
I should have
about local and state. So let's just be clear. We're not talking about your local police or fire or anything like that. We're talking about federal workers,
mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
The largest employer in the country, by the way.
Yes, by far, right. Yes, having an emergency fund becomes more imperative to that particular group of people than it is for Joe Average out there.
It becomes absolutely imperative that you have one. It's step one in your financial plan, step 1, 2, and 3, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And it's also worth noting, too, if you're a government employee, for those that don't know, because sometimes you hear a lot of rhetoric about government employees aren't getting paid, they're going to get paid. They're just not getting paid today. They will receive back pay. Mm-hmm. After the government reopens. So that's standard procedure. They're all pretty, most government employees understand that and know mm-hmm. that. So it's just kind of part of the game. But this,
and unfortunately, I think some of them are almost used to it at this point. Yeah. The issue becomes, we were talking about it. I'm looking back at this chart that you came up with that shows a lot of these shutdowns over the last, what are we looking at here, 45 years. Most of these shutdowns are 1, 2, 3 days.
Correct.
They're very, very short. So when it comes to government employees getting paid, it's shut down for 1 day. That wasn't the whole pay cycle, mm-hmm. right? So they didn't notice a change in their paycheck. When we get into these ones where it's longer than 2 weeks, like where we are right now, now's where they start feeling it. To your point, they're going to get paid eventually. Where it becomes very frustrating is those who are working in essential services. So, federal police, FBI, bureaucrats that are required to show up for work, military, people of that nature, they're still doing their job every single day, but they're not getting paid. Mm-hmm. The one that pops in my mind, I saw an interesting article. I thought it was a good human touch story, if you will. Air traffic controllers. So we had all these problems over the last, 2 years with we've had plane accidents. We've had all these kinds of things. And the biggest argument was that we don't have enough air traffic controllers and the system is out of date. So they've had this big push to go out and get all these air traffic controllers, which takes years
of training,
right? Having done a little bit of that kind of work when I was in the service, I can tell you don't learn this overnight. We've brought on all these people and then immediately cut off their pay. They've got to get frustrated, but they still have to do their job or our transit system basically shuts down. We are very dependent upon air travel in this country. I saw a neat story that one of the pilots' unions, specifically here in Louisville with UPS, actually went out and bought pizzas, right, for the air traffic controllers. Just kind of a show of solidarity, if you will. Nice. It's going to feed them for a meal. It's not going to feed them for weeks on end. But it really does start to frustrate you when you see all these people. Yes, they're going to be paid back, but right now they're trying to explain to their mortgage holder, I'll be able to pay it as soon as the government shutdown, is over, or their credit card bills or any other things that they've got. I will be able to pay it, but I can't now because I'm not getting paid. Unless they've got that emergency fund.
So that is one of the, if there was a concern, that is kind of one of the quote unquote concerns in regards to the real economy.
Right.
Is because there are so many government workers. This is once again, we're not debating whether or not there should be as many government workers as they are, because I have very clear opinions on that. Yeah. But in reality, there are real people behind this that are affected. So I want to be very cognizant of that. But the idea of the real world consequences of this is that if you are a government employee, at some point, and we're probably around that time now where you're going to start seeing government employees halt spending or at least slow it down. So from an economic perspective, you're not going to see as much money flowing into the economy. Mm-hmm. Now, on the other side, Traditionally, what has happened is you see a very, very, very temporary slowdown in economic activity as you get kind of around the end of these government shutdowns, and then it picks right back up once the back pay comes in.
Right.
So do I think that this is a lasting issue for the economy? No, I do not. I think that's a very, very temporary blip on the radar, if it even registers as a blip. Now, the longer this government shutdown goes on, I mean, we're
more
4
likely
weeks.
it's going to register.
Yeah,
right?
so we're in week 4. So if we get into week 8, 9, okay, maybe that becomes a different conversation. I don't think we'll get that long. But if we did, that becomes a different conversation around, are there going to be real consequences for the economy as far as spending is concerned?
Yeah. So let me go back to the example that I was going with, because you bring up a good point. It may or may not be a big blip yet, but the longer this goes on, the more likely it is to become that. So you go back to those air traffic controllers, and that one is personal to me because of what I did in the service. But what's coming up in about 4 more weeks? Biggest travel day of the year.
Oh, yeah.
Thanksgiving
holidays, yeah.
weekend, right? And think about the number of people that are going to be traveling. And as this goes on, there's more likelihood of people saying, you know what, I can't keep doing this, because they don't have those emergency savings, right? That's the reason that's step 1 in your plan. You're going to have lots of planes that are going to be delayed because they just simply can't handle the volume. That's going to affect the airline companies. That's going to affect their employees, from the most highly paid all the way down to the guy who's taking out the garbage in the airport somewhere. There's a trickle-down effect to this. So to your point, the U.S. government is the single biggest employer in the country. When those people are not getting paid, it trickles down. But in some specific jobs, it's going to trickle down even further because of the nature of what they do. So the one fear that I have is that the temper tantrum that the people in our Senate are currently having, which is where this is coming from. The House already passed a bill.
Yeah.
It's the Senate where the problem is happening. If that temper tantrum does not end and they don't come up with something that they can agree on, or somebody gives in, that's when we start having problems, is when we get into the holidays.
The Senate is where the problem is happening. That's an evergreen.
Yes, that is an evergreen comment.
That's an evergreen statement if I've ever heard one. The Senate is the problem, right? So
I did say that, didn't I? Yeah, I sure did.
So with that being said, once again, not to minimize the real world impact of government employees, but the federal government represents less than 2% of the federal workforce.
Yeah.
Right. And then even from a lesser degree of that, because there are still, some members of the federal government that are quote unquote essential services, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you count down those that are still working and still getting paid, there are some folks out there that are getting paid depending upon what you do in the government. Then that percentage is even smaller.
Yeah.
So yes, once again, I'm not minimizing if you're in that percentage that is affected, but when you look at the ratio of overall workers in the economy, it's not really an outsized problem.
Right.
As it relates to the economy as a whole. Okay. Another interesting side effect that I hadn't really thought of until I read some talking points on the situation was any kind of federal government data that is set to be released, and this has more of an effect on the stock market. But any government data that's set to be released could be put on hold. Yeah. So as an investor, we might not be getting some timely information here soon. The longer that this thing goes on, I'm not saying that's necessarily good or bad. Once again, we just don't know. We're not going to know some specific numbers as it relates to government, like things like employment data, jobs numbers, right. Jobless rates, things like that, right? All the government data that comes out on a quarterly basis is all going to be delayed because some of that data is just not getting produced and it's not going to be published. And so we're going to be in the dark as it relates to, from an investment standpoint, on some numbers that are, important to the economy, right?
And to be clear, the reason that that's going to be delayed in many cases is because the people who do that work are considered to be non-essential. Mm-hmm. So they're at home right now.
Yeah.
As opposed to the essential workers who are continuing to work and doing so without pay.
So looking at inflation trends, economic trends, things like that, we're going to be in the dark for, a short amount of time, perhaps. So that'll be interesting to see if anything substantial comes of that or anything substantial that we miss. But we won't know that until the government reopens and we see those delayed reports. Yeah. Now, by all indications, I don't think there's anything major, knock on wood, that we're going to be missing, right? And I, could be wrong. Obviously, I'm wrong on occasion. every couple of years it happens, but anyway, we'll see. We'll just have to wait and see. I don't think that'll be a major consequence, but that is a potential consequence of the government being shut down. Yeah. So,
I'm going to kind of change gears a little bit. Go back to something we were talking about a minute ago, where a government shutdown has become, quite frankly, a political tool.
For sure.
But I was thinking, man, these seem to happen all the time. So I'm looking at this chart and I'm going, you know what? We have these, once a year, twice a year? No, it's not that frequent. In fact, according to this chart, now this data is good through the end of last year, so there's nothing on this year, but we haven't had a shutdown this year. During the Biden administration, there was not a shutdown at all. It seems to me like we had several, but we didn't.
Threats of several.
There were a lot of threats. That's exactly the point. During the first Trump administration, there were 2, one of which was only 3 days long. The other one of which was 35 days. I believe that one is the record, if I'm not mistaken.
And we're coming up on it.
We're getting there. Then you go back to the Obama administration. That's 8 years long. We only had 1. The Bush administration, another 8 years. We had 0. The Clinton administration, that's another 8 years. And we had 2, and interestingly enough, they were in the same year, right? And then we go back into the Bush and Reagan years. There were, multiples there, and all of them lasted less than a week.
Less than a business week.
Yeah, less than a business week, right.
Yeah.
I just found that interesting that it seems like when we talk about this, oh my gosh, I'm so tired of having government shutdowns all the time. It's not that we're having them all the time. It's that the threat, to your point, is all the time.
Well, I think that's why the sting has worn off, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because when I say I'm not really hearing much about this one, I think that's probably a big reason why. Because we hear so much about the threat of a government shutdown that it's like Charlie kicking the football.
Yeah,
right?
I was just thinking the boy who cried wolf, right?
The boy who cried wolf, Charlie kicking the football. Like we hear about it so much as a threat, and then now that it's actually here, and the dramatically high number of people are not affected by this in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, with the exception of the people that we were talking about, the government employees. It's nobody notices it anymore.
And I've always had a theory why these were so short is because the longer that these go on, the longer more people realize that they're not going to be quite nearly as dependent on the government or government services as the government would want you to believe, which would lead to more people thinking maybe they're not quite as essential as they want.
Our political philosophy starting to come out here.
So. But anyway, that's I won't delve too terribly deep on that one. But generally speaking, that is interesting. There is another impact that could potentially happen is if this continues to go on much longer, and this is another reason why I think they'll probably end up getting this thing fixed or coming to some kind of an agreement. But reduction in force, RIFs.
Yeah.
So at some point, you're going to start seeing layoffs. It hasn't happened yet. But we're not only talking about, government employees being basically out of work for a few months, but then getting back pay when they go back. We're talking about them losing their job.
Right.
And that could have a much bigger impact than some folks not getting paid for a couple weeks.
So interesting for those of us who work in the private sector, and most of us work in states where there is some kind of right to work law. We all know that if you're working for a company or something like that, you could lose your job at virtually any time. Most of us have been there. I remember, we're coming up on Halloween. A company that I worked for years ago, we were clipping along. Everything was going well. Business was good. The particular region of the country that we were responsible for, we were very profitable, doing well. Had a conference call on Halloween morning. To give you an idea of how shocking it was, everybody on my staff was dressed up but me, and they were all mocking me for it. In fact, one of them was wearing the Cleveland Indians outfit with Ricky Vaughn on it, so he was really teasing me. And we get on this conference call, and they said, "We're laying all of you off. Human resources should be in your office by now." And we literally turn around, and there's the human resources person handing us our final paychecks, right? When you work in the private world, that is always a possibility. In the government sector, it doesn't work like that because you have civil service laws that protect employees, bureaucrats, from losing their jobs. And they're there for a good reason, and that's because You don't want all the people who were hired under one political party's administration to immediately be fired just because somebody else won the next election. I mean, they're there for a good reason. But those are effectively suspended when everybody is already off anyway. And that's been one of the big threats that the Trump administration has put out there is if you leave this too long, we would like to reduce the size of government anyway, and we're going to start riffing reduction in forces. And I think to your point, that's going to start happening a little bit more aggressively the longer this goes on. And quite frankly, not only is it a political belief of the current administration, but it's also another political tactic. You will come back to the table or more of this is going to happen. And these tend to be Democratic voters.
And as it relates to the economy and the market, stock market, there have already been some modest reductions in jobs this year.
Yep.
Because of AI, because of inflation, what have you. So if you add to that, and especially you add to that in a way that it's going to make a lot of headlines, that could potentially have legs and could potentially scare the market a little bit if we have a little bit of a quick uptick in job layoffs, right? Yep. So that's another real world potential consequence, at least as it relates to our world and the investment space. Right. But once again, we'll see. I don't think it'll come to that. I highly doubt it will come to that. I don't think anyone wants to quote unquote be responsible for that.
But exactly.
Who knows? I could be wrong. And once again, I'm probably due to be wrong. So
we've been talking about how government shutdown affects the population, the economy. I think most people are understanding that the world is continuing to go on. There are people who are much more impacted by this than others, but for most of us, the world continues. Everything is going on as normal.
Social Security checks are still being cut.
That's exactly right. In fact,
Medicare still works, right?
I was showing a client the other day. They asked a question about that, and they were getting ready to file. We're actually, she's going to be filing next month. He's going to be filing in January. And I was kind of walking them through the process. So we pulled up the Social Security website on the TV in the meeting room, and the very top there was a banner. Social Security payments will not be impacted, or however it was worded, by the current government shutdown. So they're making it very clear you're not impacted by this. That being said, we do tend to worry about how this is going to impact the market, so on and so forth. Apparently, the bourbon is fairly good today. This is the second week in a row Eric's had to top off a little bit. Okay, so
I've already had like 4 meetings this morning, so I'm
you're
probably
right?
ready for a couple of drinks.
So I thought, and we had discussed this before we started recording, I think we need to start looking at historically what happens to the markets when the government is shut down, because the markets are still open. The people who are running the markets and doing the trading and those individual companies, they're all private companies. So they are continuing on. They're not shut down.
The markets have not been
impacted.
The markets have not been affected in any way, shape, or form whatsoever today.
We've had a couple of down days, but that's normal.
So what's interesting, and we'll pull up the chart on the screen so you can see it a little bit more clearly if you're watching on YouTube. But this is just a chart representing, the S&P 500 juxtaposed against the history of government shutdowns, right? And a couple of things pop out immediately. Usually once there is a shutdown, usually the market goes down during the shutdown. That's actually fairly normal, really, up until there was one during the Obama years in 2013. There wasn't really much of a shutdown. There was a little bit of a blip, but not much. But for the most part, there's usually some type of a drawdown in stocks during the government shutdown.
Right.
What is not unique in every single one of these situations is once the government reopens, there's an immediate pop in the market, and the market goes up. And that's across the board, I think, for every single one of these.
Yeah. Certainly looks that way.
Your reopenings, if you will, whenever the government reopens, there's pretty much an immediate pop almost right away across the board throughout history. So that will be interesting to see if that continues, if that trend continues, because there's really been no drawdown because of the government shutdown over the last few weeks. The market's still hovering right around all-time highs. There's been no effect, no demonstrable effect in any way, shape, or form that I can see.
Let's not jinx it.
Once again, knock on wood, knock on wood, right? But it'll be interesting to see if there's another pop-up beyond what's kind of been, because we've been treading water, so to speak, I would think. I would say recently over the last couple of weeks, but there's been no drawdown.
That's an interesting point. It just now popped into mind. We've been discussing, every few years you need to have a correction, a drawdown in the markets just to keep everything balanced, right? So that things are not overinflated. And the discussion has come up on a lot of sources lately that we're due, right? Sometime in the next year or so, that's likely to happen.
I mean, I'm about to turn off every investing podcast because all I hear about is this AI bubble that's going to pop. And when everyone's talking about something, it usually never happens.
Right.
But we'll come back to that.
So, my thought was, okay, I'm curious because to your point, if you look back historically, when there's a shutdown, the market tends to be somewhat down during that time frame. We're not talking about major downturns. We're just talking about down a little bit. And then there's a pop as soon as the government opens back up. I'm wondering, since we haven't had, at least up to today, as we're recording not quite 5 weeks into this, will there be a pop when it opens back up this time?
It'll be interesting.
Or is some of the more negative prognosticators out there, are they going to actually be proven right? And will it have anything to do with the shutdown? I would argue it probably won't have anything to do with the shutdown. If we do have a downturn in the markets, it will be because the markets are naturally rebalancing themselves.
And it's interesting too, and this is going to be a little bit of a side note, but I've had this conversation twice just this morning with clients because I've been getting a lot of conversations, and you always hear questions, when the market's at all-time highs, what do you think the market's going to do? Should we be concerned? Should we change strategy, and et cetera, right? And you're hearing so much talk around this AI bubble everywhere. CNBC, Fox Business, is there an AI bubble? Is the bubble going to pop? If you just take a step back and look at the markets in general, and I try very, very hard not to overcomplicate things when it comes to investments, right?
Right.
If you look historically at the markets are up 3 out of every 4 years, 75% of the time, give or take. 2019, 2020, 2021. We had 3
awesome years.
We had 3 really positive years.
There was one big negative downturn in 2020 when COVID first hit, but we recovered so rapidly that it really is a freakish looking thing on a chart.
Yeah. So we had 3 really good years in a row. 2022 was negative.
Yep.
23, 24, and now 25, and we're close enough to the end of 25 that I can say probably we're going to be up.
We're going to have a positive year.
We're going to have a pretty good year, barring some very significant setback at this point in the last 2 months of the year. We're due for a bad year. Just regardless of what's going on in the world, regardless of what's going on with the government shutdown and the AI bubble and the Magnificent Seven and the mega caps and all this stuff that you hear about that's going to scare you on the news. Sometimes you just need a correction, right? You just have to correct a little bit, and that's very, very natural in the course of events. And sometimes it has nothing to do with any of the things that you think it would be. Sometimes these things are just happening around the same time that we're due for a correction in the market. Sometimes you just need a catalyst to generate that correction, kind of like what we had earlier this year when we had another very quick correction. We dipped into a bear market in the NASDAQ for a very, very short amount of time, but because of all the tariff and the Liberation Day stuff, but we bounced back so quickly from that's just already a distant memory.
We don't even think about it
And
anymore.
I remember doing podcast episodes about all the tariff stuff and how everyone was asking questions about it, and it was all over the news. And we're not even a year removed, and it's nothing.
Yeah,
it's
gone.
Absolutely nothing. Nobody even remembers that it happened. And the tariffs had no impact on the economy so far. Once again, knock on wood, so far, right? I don't know, but we're to the point now where we've had earnings seasons, and there's been no material effect from the tariffs at this point. So
I am curious because we do have a lot of earnings coming out next week, and by the time this publishes, this will all be done. I am curious if anything is going to be impacted by this. I'm not losing any sleep over it, to be truthful, because the average company, which is what your stocks are based on, right? The average company is still clipping along. It really is. It just is not impacted by government shutdowns at all, especially in the short term.
The average across the board during the last earnings season for the S&P 500, I think it was over 8%. There was an 8% earnings increase across the board for all S&P 500 companies. That's pretty good, guys. It's pretty good.
Yes, please. I'll take 2.
Companies are growing. Companies are doing well. I'm not saying every facet of the economy is in perfect condition. That's not what I'm saying, and nothing ever is. People are still very affected by inflation. I know that is a very real problem for a lot of folks. There's some issues in the economy, and I know that there are specific industries that are affected by the tariffs. Yep. But when we're looking at the markets as a whole,
right,
and that's what our job is to, kind of keep things in context. It's been a nothing burger.
Yeah,
it really has, and I don't really see any immediate reason, anyway, to have any major concern about a significant drawback in the near future. Yeah. Now we'll see what 2026 has in store when we get there, right? But right now,
So that sounds to me like a good point to stop.
It does.
And let's talk about Four Roses Small Batch Select. So I'm going to assume that this is a very positive thing for you because you've already kind of topped off a little bit.
Yeah, it's a good pour. It's a good pour. Like I'm never going to be the guy that is going to give you all the tasting notes. Yep. I'm just not that sophisticated of a drinker.
Folks, I'm really working on it. I promise.
Either I like it or I don't. I will say I'm looking at the tasting notes on the back of the bottle and it says subtle oak. I would not say that it's that subtle.
Yeah, it's very oaky.
Yeah, I mean, but now it's saying, red fruits and nutmeg and clove. I'm not getting all that. Maybe
I'm going to be real honest with you. I get none of that.
Yeah.
And I read the tasting notes as well.
I'm definitely getting, it is definitely oaky for sure, but it's smooth. It's a good pour.
Yep.
I'm not going to go out of my way to, to deitize it, but it's also not a bad bottle.
So this is something that you would buy again. Right?
Oh, you said it was 47?
47, yeah.
It's a good 47. It's a good bottle for sure. Yeah.
There is nothing about this that I dislike. Right? It's a smooth pour. It's a little bit hot for a 104 proof. This tastes like the proof is a little bit higher than that, but not much.
But when I put some water in it, that goes away.
Yeah, most of it did. I would tell you that my one complaint, and it is a fairly major complaint, there's not enough going on here. I like the complexity. Yeah. So that's a personal choice, right? Some people would absolutely, this would be the favorite thing they would ever drink, and it's okay. I like it. I would drink it again. It's not something, I'm reminded now why I haven't had this in several years. Because when the bottle was gone, I didn't rush out to buy another one. It wasn't something that I had to have because it's so good. Something that we probably should try. If you like the Four Roses Barrel Select, or not Barrel Select.
I feel like you're downplaying it a little bit. I think maybe I like it more than you because it is a good pour.
There's no question you do. I think if you like this, what we should probably try, one that I actually really like, is the single barrel strength, which is a great pour, and they have 4 different batches they combine together. It's really very interesting program. Never had one of those I didn't like. Yeah. But it's also a more expensive pour. Now, part of that's because it's barrel strength. They don't get as much yield.
Yeah.
It's understandable. You're going to get into the 120 range. For the people who don't really know that much about bourbon, or maybe you're just kind of a newbie and you want to learn, as a rule, as the proof goes up, so goes the flavor. Now, there comes a point where the burn from that proof kind of burns out all the different flavors. There are some happy spots. One of the most incredible pours of bourbon I've ever had in my life was from Old Louisville. It was a unique batch. I was told there were only 6 bottles ever made.
Yeah.
I don't want to know how much it cost. I really don't. I got to drink a glass of it. It was 156 proof, if I remember correctly. That's one of those things you expect if you spilled some of it, the carpet would catch on fire, right? Wasn't hot. It was just wonderful, wonderful flavors. I think this would be a lot better if it was a higher proof. But if it was a higher proof, it wouldn't be a $47 bourbon. It would be a $60 or $65. And now we get into that argument of, okay, does the flavor justify the additional cost? I don't know.
I will say once again, just because it's just happenstance that I just happened to get a bottle of Four Roses earlier this month that I hadn't had in a while, which is not bad by no means.
No.
But tasting that against this is definitely better.
And see, I think from memory, it's been a while, I like the actual regular small batch at the lower proof better than this, which is really surprising. But that's kind of the point of bourbon. There's 1,000,001 different variations out there because there's so many different palates, and what you like and what I like don't have to be the same thing.
Yeah.
This is good. Please, I don't mean to undersell it. But
Well, especially at $47.
at $47, it's really good.
It's a good pour at 47.
But there are other things in that price point that I like better that are somewhat readily available.
I will, yeah. So I always go to that Old Forester whiskey series that we did in that 18.
The 1870,
the 1870,
which is right in this price point, readily available, at least in this area.
That's my go-to under 50. That's kind of like I always typically have a bottle of that. I really like that pour.
I'll be real honest with you. I like both. I would do that Olfo the 1870 every time.
And so that's always kind of my benchmark for, okay, at this price point, can you knock this off? Mm-hmm. And this is good. This is close, right? This is a very good pour. I wouldn't call it quite as good as that Old Foe 1870, but it's really, really good. I do like it, and I would be happy to have this bottle anytime.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So let's go back to our subject and kind of summarize everything a little bit, and then we will stop boring everyboring to death with the
how evil the government is. I mean, how little
that's a different podcast.
I mean, how little the government shutdown means to you. Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
So looking back. Go back to this chart that we've got. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, if I'm seeing that correctly. Government shutdown since 1980. And what I see after all 10 of those is, yes, there were some drawdowns during it in most cases, but almost immediately the market goes right back to where it was or higher within a very short period of time. Certainly inside the same year, and in most cases, it's a big chart.
It's pretty immediate.
I would say this is within a month of the time that shutdown is over. The markets themselves, and we're talking specifically about the S&P 500.
And this is across all different presidents, right? Different.
Yeah, Democrat and Republican. The same thing happens when the government shutdown ends. Everything springs back to above where it was when all of this happened. Right, so it's from a market point of view. Historically, this is a blip. It is no different. I think the markets are affected by it, but not nearly as much as what we think, and it's more emotional than it is. Logically, it should go down because
in the short term. You mean?
Yeah, it's short term. If you are an investor, you probably should not be paying much attention at all to the government shutdown from an investing point of view.
If you even know the government is shut down.
If you're even aware of it, right. I suddenly feel bad. Did we just tell some people that the government is shut down and they didn't know about it? So hopefully not.
Yeah. And once again, like it'll be interesting to see. To me, what will be most interesting throughout this whole ordeal is if we actually get to the point where we're cutting workforce.
Yeah.
That's the concern. Concern. I don't want to say hope because you don't necessarily want people to lose their jobs. But, if you're of the opinion that the government is too big, this is a kind of ready-made opportunity to shrink it. But it'll just be interesting to see because however it plays out, that will be a catalyst one way or the other. Okay, if people start losing their actual jobs, that will be a catalyst in some way, shape, or form for whatever the next iteration of this government shutdown is going to be. And I don't know what type of effect that will have on the market, but that will be the catalyst for whatever it is.
Agreed.
Because right now, nothing is happening. It's a big nothing burger. Most people don't even realize it's happening. The economy hasn't been affected. It hasn't slowed down. It's such a relatively small percentage of the workforce that's affected. That workforce they kind of know they're going to get their back pay.
Right.
So we'll see.
I would argue that, to your point, a lot of people don't even realize it, or they've forgotten about it. Your wife was not aware. My wife was like, yeah, I know about it. How many of us are going to even be remembering this by Christmas, which is 2 months away from now?
I don't remember the last government shutdown. I didn't realize we had one for 35 days in 2018.
Yeah, I had forgotten.
I was probably clued in and listening to all the stuff about it at the time, but it's so far...
It's gone in memory
so
now.
Far removed,
I would say, assuming that this were to end in the next week or two, for example, I would say by Christmas we've forgotten about it. Definitely by spring, nobody will remember that this happened, right? Except the people that it happened to, and they, to your point, will have already been paid back and everything will be fine again. So I think nothing burger was a really apt description of what a government shutdown truly means in the long-term scheme.
Yeah, so So with that, that's probably a pretty good place to wrap things up, unless you have any more thoughts. Do you have any other thoughts on the government, Chris, that you'd like to share?
I've got lots of thoughts on the government. If you and I had never met, I would introduce myself as one of the most opinionated people you'll ever meet. And then you and I met and we became friends, and it's like, man, I got a cohort here. Yeah. He's maybe more opinionated than I am.
Yeah.
We don't agree on everything, but we're pretty close. We're not big fans of the way things are done in Washington, or for that matter, Frankfurt.
What's really interesting. It's funny that you say this, and if anyone's still listening, you might find this funny, especially if you know my daughter. But I got a notification from a teacher this week about my daughter. Nothing bad necessarily, but she's definitely a little talkative. But I found there were two different instances I heard from two different teachers this week that she's happy expressing her opinions.
An acorn does not fall far from the tree, right?
And I heard the stories, and my wife is hearing the stories, and of course my wife is very much like, of course,
this is your fault.
This is your daughter. Yeah. The joke in our house is Lexi's my daughter, and Cole is her. Cole is her. Like, that's your son, but this is my daughter.
Right. Oh yeah.
It's interesting how that happens, but yeah.
I've got two boys, and it's the same thing. We've joked. My oldest is Chris Jr. We call him CJ, and we've joked that we've named them backwards because CJ is so much like my wife, and my youngest Casey he's a mini me, and it terrifies me. But same thing. He is very opinionated. An acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. So if you want to come into the office and talk politics, feel free to come in and talk to myself or Eric, and you will get plenty of opinions.
Scheduled on a Friday afternoon after we've tasted
exactly.
a wonderful Four Roses small batch select. So with that being said, probably a pretty good place to wrap up. If you are listening, if you could please give us a review on podcast, right? Or whatever, wherever you happen to be listening to this content, we greatly appreciate it. If you would like to come in and see us, look in the show notes. You'll see a link to schedule a meeting or a call with us. We would greatly appreciate the opportunity to discuss government shutdowns or whatever might be top of mind for you as it relates to any retirement topic. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll talk soon.